Today is February 12th, 2018, and we are in the Cardinal Room. It is 7:01. This is a legislative meeting for the School District of Upper Dublin. I'd like to welcome everybody here tonight, and I'd like to start off by asking everybody to please stand. And Ben, I haven't seen you for so long. Maybe you can lead us in the salute to the flag.
With pleasure. I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America
and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Ben is one of the hardest working men here at Upper Dublin High School, and it's a pleasure having him here and joining us. He's involved with so many things. Okay, roll call, please, Ms. Evans.
Dr. Levinowitz.
Present.
Dr. Ludwig. Here. Mr. Sirota. Here. Mrs. Rothman.
Excused absence.
Okay. Mrs. Good.
Excused absence.
Thank you. Dr. Kim.
Here.
Mrs. Sherpier. Here. Mrs. Franczek. Here. Mr. Ropsky.
Here.
Okay. Two absent.
2 absent, 7 attend. Okay. Ben, anything going on at the high school?
Well, Dr. Levinowitz, I am glad you asked. Midterms are over and the third quarter has come underway. Flowergrams are currently being sold in the Valentine's nature, and preparations for Dancing with the Cards are underway, which is going to happen in March. Huh? Key Club's Blood Drive is in just 2 days and is an incredible example of the UDHS student body's charitable spirit. The girls' basketball team is finishing their season strong, with their last 10 of 11 regular season games being wins. Their final regular season game is coming up a week from tomorrow, and then off to the playoffs. The winter track team is continuing to make strong appearances, with one of their last meets at Lehigh seeing such highlights as Brandis Vargas Bynes with a second-place medal in the varsity 200 meters, setting a personal record. Keeping with the idea of highlighting a different club each month, this meeting I would like to talk about Spanish Club. Spanish Club is the largest club in Upper Dublin High School. With co-presidents Jeffrey Fishman and Leah Manjafesta, this past year they raised nearly $2,000 for Puerto Rico after the disaster that happened, which is an incredible achievement. This past Saturday, approximately 20 students went to Spain on an exchange program which happened through Spanish Club. The club is a great opportunity to learn about Spanish culture and use the skills you've been working on in class. As the school enters its penultimate quarter, the students are ready to push ahead to new grounds. Thanks, and go Birds.
Muy bien, muy bien. Okay. So we're talking playoffs with the girls, huh? And then world championships? We'll have a parade in Upper Dublin. Okay. Just want to offer my sincere congratulations to our Philadelphia Eagles. Doesn't happen too often. We have, for them, it's the first time, so it does not happen too often. Okay, moving on to the superintendent's report, Dr. Wheeler.
Thank you, Dr. Levinowitz. This evening I have several items of interest for the board. First, our preliminary work on developing the next comprehensive plan is underway, and Joanne Parati from the Bucks County IU will be with us this evening to present an overview of the process. There are several elements of the planning process that I want to call to the board's attention. The existing comprehensive plan that you developed in 2015 has not existed in isolation. You will note that our district goals for the past 3 years have been built on the foundation established through that 2015 plan, the goals and strategies that were developed, as well as the core foundations that are presented by the PDE as part of the comprehensive planning rubric. So watch for this alignment during the presentation. Just for a refresher on district goals, they are available on the website if anyone would like to go back and cross-reference those. You will also note during Joanne's presentation of the timeline of this process that the work must begin now and must be significantly, substantially drafted before my final day in the district. So I have requested that an opportunity be built into the timeline for my successor to have substantive input into the draft before it is presented to the board in September, and Joanne has assured us that that will happen. Moving on, Sandy Run. On January 29th, as you know, the board entertained presentations from 3 architecture firms regarding Sandy Run Middle School. I regret that I was absent due to illness that evening, but I have had an opportunity to watch the video. Quite interesting. And the next step in the process will be to schedule site visits for members of the board to experience a school day in buildings that were designed by these architects. Dr. Clark and I are also working to schedule conversations with the respective principals and superintendents of those schools to talk in more depth about their satisfaction with the design and the construction process, and ultimately how satisfied they are with their final product. We will share our findings with the board following those conversations. And believe it or not, spring is just around the corner, and we have several key annual events coming up. So I have several save the dates for the board. First, in 2 weeks, music in our school's concerts. The choral concert on February 27th at 7 in the PAC. And the instrumental concert will be on March 1st, again 7 p.m. at the PAC. Links for tickets are available on the district website. You can find that on the home page or on the calendar page. The Upper Dublin High School Athletic Hall of Fame induction for the class of 2018 will be held on March 4th at 2 o'clock, and we will begin in the Aplex lobby and then move into the gymnasium for the bulk of the ceremony. Information about that event and a link to reservations can be found on the district website as well. Monte Carlo night will be held on March 10th at 7 p.m. in the Fort Washington Mercedes-Benz dealership. Big fundraiser for the Ed Foundation, and tickets and donation information is available on the Upper Dublin Education Foundation website or the district website. And finally, in response to community concerns about vaping and juuling, there's been a great deal of conversation about that. On March 22nd at 7 o'clock in the PAC, an information session for parents will be presented by the NOPE Task Force. This is an agency that provides drug abuse prevention information, education, and advocacy for families and students. They also will spend some time during the day with our students here at the high school, and the middle school is working on a follow-up program there. Many of our neighboring districts have presented NOPE programs to their students and parents, and they have strongly endorsed working with this agency. Additionally, I want the board to know that we now understand that juuling devices can masquerade as flash drives, which can be recharged through devices such as Chromebooks. However, part of the beauty of the work that we're doing with Chromebooks is that no one has any need to have a flash drive. So we are working with our faculty and staff to let our students know, and we want parents to know, that flash drives will not be permitted to be used within the school, and should anyone see one, they may be confiscating those devices. So if there are any questions, I will be happy to entertain them, and otherwise that concludes my report for the night.
Okay, any questions from the board on that? Okay, we're moving into the presentations now. We have 3 presentations tonight. The first one will be presented, I'll ask Principal Mr. Bob Schultz, proud principal of the Upper Dublin High School, to come on up to the podium, and he will lead the presentation.
Members of the board, administration, and community, thank you very much for the opportunity tonight to recognize someone with whom we have had a partnership for 20 years now. We have an outstanding family and consumer science department. One of the longtime educators, Jan McLean, first brought Mary Cushing Doherty to my attention, and then working with Julie Clapp over the past few years, I've learned even more about her excellence, her passion for education, and her work with our students. So we are going to make a presentation to her, thanking her for all the work she's put in, but to make sure that the board and the community are well aware of the details of her work, we have asked Mrs. Clapp to say a few words.
So a speech to acknowledge Mary Cushing Doherty is simplified by Mary's accomplishments. I can just list some of the countless awards she has received and look like a polished presenter. I'm hoping, however, to communicate the touch that Mary has had on our students' lives. Mary has been presenting the impact of divorce on children for over 20 years in our Child Development 2 classes at Upper Dublin High School. The programs have been continuously updated and reinvented, and Mary has added additional speakers, including Upper Dublin parent and attorney Stephanie Weingrad, a co-collaborator for the past 9 years, who's here tonight. She has also invited the Honorable Risa Vetri Furman and Mary Pugh, Executive Director of the Montgomery County Child Advocacy Project. Additional visitors have included Senator Greenleaf for 3 years and CBS News from Philadelphia for 3 years. The students' learning has been progressive, engaged, and relevant, with the focus last year of the impact of social media on divorce in children. Additionally, the American Academy of Matrimonial Lawyers website describes Mary's work with Upper Dublin High School students. Mary served a primary role updating the Voices of Children video project, which was initially conceived in 2011 by a committee of the Fellows. Mary joined the committee in So Mary joined the committee in 2013 and was instrumental in casting and coordinating the filming in the Guidance Center of child actors from Upper Dublin High School in the nationally distributed video. And I think she's brought some here tonight to share if you'd like some. And I have them in our department also. Last June, Mary received the Pennsylvania Bar Association's Special Achievement Award in recognition of her tireless assistance with meeting with legislators addressing the harmful impact of divorce waiting periods on children. The effort, which took more than 4 years, culminated in the adoption of Act 102, which went into effect in December of 2016. The movement to shorten the waiting periods to 1 year was rooted in studies in child development that found that the longer a family was in legal limbo, the more stress the children endured in their development was suspended. With much appreciation for Mary's enduring work with our child development students, indirect work with children impacted by improved divorce legislation, and finally selecting Upper Dublin student actors for the Child Voices video, Jan McLean and I are using this forum to offer you our public appreciation for your vast contributions to our students. Thank you. And thank you very much.
So I know Mary wants to say a few words, but the certificate that she's receiving states, is without glasses, thank you very much, that this certificate of recognition is awarded to Mary Cushing Doherty, whose outstanding efforts emulate the district goal of striving for excellence in recognition of 20 years of service educating students in the complexities of family law. Everyone, would you please again recognize Mary Cushing Doherty.
It was my privilege, probably 22, 23 years ago, a colleague of mine said, we've got this program called Partners, and someone at Upper Dublin wants to do the program. Do you know Upper Dublin? I'm like, I go to Gennardi's in Maple Glen. Of course I know Upper Dublin, because I was a Horsham native, and I raised my children in Horsham. And I thought, well, you know, you're talking about divorce law. Maybe it's better to be at your neighbor high school of Upper Dublin. And then it's really scary. You must have this. When you go to the grocery store and this fresh young face says, hi, Mrs. Doherty, I'm like, gotta be an Upper Dublin person. Let me just give you an example of how special it was to have the connection with Upper Dublin to do the Voices of the Children of Divorce. A lawyer friend of mine in the middle of the state met with students talking about their families. and they represented 6 different families. And he's like, this is great. I did this session with the kids talking about the challenges and the difficulties of being children of divorce, and we'll make a video out of it. And we're like, yeah, right. Those parents, maybe mom is okay with that child being on the video, or maybe dad, but not the other parent. So we were ready to chuck it. And I said, no, you don't know my people at Upper Dublin. And my brother-in-law is a producer. They not only learned about children of divorce, they learned about production. We had a day-long, everyone got interviewed, and we videotaped their auditions, and the final product is the faces of your students standing in the place of real children of divorce. It took a lot of courage. I thank you. I talked to Deb Weaver about, can we do this? And she said, yes, go for it. And I got to tell you, when I first started teaching, I like public speaking. Oh my gosh, those kids scared the heck out of me. As I got more energetic, they were like working at being bored. I don't know how you're a high school teacher. It's like, you got to get over that mountain. And Jan McLean would say to me, Mary, slow down, slow down. I'd go to class 1. In class 2, I would come, and a girl came up to me after class 2 and said, how do I talk my mom into leaving my father? Because it's not good at home. And it breaks your heart. When we got this idea, every year we try to get a little spark from the kids. One year, the legislature was talking about canceling no-fault divorce. Your students wrote letters to the legislature, and I gave them to Stuart Greenleaf and one of our representatives in Pennsylvania. I said, you've got to hear what the students who are thinking about this, what they're telling you. Last year we did this thing on social media, and Stephanie, that first class, we're like, are they with us? What's going on here? And they were really quiet and shy. By the second class, they knocked our socks off. So I've enjoyed working with your students. I've enjoyed being with your young people. I did bring 10 copies of the video so you can see what a beautiful job they did. And thank you for the opportunity to be part of your community. Special thanks to my partner, Gil High, who is a member of Upper Dublin Township. He works for you. He's a solicitor. And Susan Hyde, they came as part of my family. They're my family from High Swartz. They support me. Thank you, Stephanie, for being a wonderful support. We've been through the hills and valleys. I'm having a bad year, Stephanie steps in. Anything I can do for you, for her, I will do, because she's a wonderful person and a great Upper Dublin mom. Thank you.
So congratulations, and this doesn't mean it's over. I mean, another 20 years, Mary? Another 20? Okay, sign that contract. Okay, we are moving on. Again, congratulations to Ms. Clapp and Mr. Schultz. Thank you for bringing Mary to us and everyone else involved. Mr. Height? Okay, 20 years, 20 more. Okay. We're now moving on to our second presentation. I'll ask Dr. Wheeler to present that.
Yes, joining us this evening is Joanne Parati from the Bucks County IU. She is the Director of Strategic Services, and she has a long record of working with many districts, not only in Bucks County, but throughout southeastern Pennsylvania, leading comprehensive planning processes. She's seen it all. She worked with us 4 years ago, and she's prepared to move us along very, very quickly now. So she's going to do an overview of just what is involved with this process.
Great.
Joanne.
Thank you so much, Dr. Wheeler. I'm very honored and pleased to be your external coordinator for the comprehensive planning process for the Upper Dublin School District. As Dr. Wheeler stated, I'm the Director of Strategic Services at the Bucks County Intermediate Unit, and my job every day for the past 23 years has been working with school districts, organizations, and businesses throughout Southeast Pennsylvania, developing comprehensive and strategic plans. I absolutely love the work I do, and I love working with districts developing plans. So I have a brief PowerPoint to give you that 30,000-foot view this evening of the process that we'll be using. This is a required comprehensive plan through the Department of Education, but what I love being the external facilitator for with this process is that working with the district to really develop a plan that you're going to be using every day that's part of the fabric of your district. So I will make your district compliant with the Department of Education, but as we go through the process, it's very, very important to develop a plan that really impacts every child that walks into every door of every school here in Upper Dublin. So if you look at a comprehensive plan, it's the means by which we constantly go from good to great. And so that's the process that we'll be using throughout the comprehensive planning this particular year. This is probably my most favorite slide, thinking about all those dreams and visions and ideas that you have for the Upper Dublin School District, but building that bridge and turning that plan into operation, actions, and doing is the hardest part. So that's the process that we're going to be doing, involving all the stakeholders here in the community. So in order to do a comprehensive strategic plan, you always have to think about the history of the district. You have to think about where we have been, where we are right now, and where do we want to go in the future. You want to think about what's working well here. What can we say that we're proud of? What are those accomplishments? What can we recognize that we're doing very well? But we want to think about those points of pride. And then also we want to think about those expectations and plans that we have for the future. I'm going to give you the timeline, and as Dr. Wheeler stated, our plan is due to the Department of Education by November 30th of this year. But the process began starting last month when I had the opportunity to meet with your key administrative leadership team to detail the process, to do a reflection session with them. Also had an opportunity to meet with your principals and your directors during that week to look at what they felt the strengths of the district are, what the challenges, opportunities, and threats and fears are. What we want to do is to collect a needs assessment, look at the comprehensive plan that we already have in place, but then reach out to the community through a survey, asking the parents, the staff, the students, like Ben that was here this evening. We want to get their input on what's working, but again, what can we be proud of? So that piece we'll be doing from now to March. Part of the comprehensive planning process is your special education plan. So your special education team here at Upper Dublin has been working on that plan. That plan is going to be going on review next month as the requirement through the Department of Education for 28 days on the front page of your website for your community to review. Then we will be bringing that special education plan to the board for approval in April at your board meeting. Then following through May 1st, that special ed plan is required to be submitted to the Department of Education. Also on May 1st, we're going to be reaching out to the community to involve stakeholders in the development of the comprehensive plan. Now, there are certain requirements that the Department of Education expect of each school district. You must have teachers involved in that process. You must have educational specialists. You must have parents. You must have community members. You must have business members. And interestingly enough, the Department of Education does not require school board members or students to be part of that steering team. And so as the external facilitator, I think it's so important, if you're going to be approving the plan, that you're part of the process. Also listening to how well Ben spoke this evening, to have students involved, because it's important to hear from our students here in the district what their thoughts are about the district. So we'll be doing that on May 1st, and details will follow coming through on that. Then from May to June, we'll be developing action plans. Then in the summer, there's a web tool that I'll be working with the district to input all that information. Then in September and October, the plan must be on display for 28 days for the public to review. Then we will be bringing the plan to you as board members to approve in November at your board meeting. And then from that point, it will be submitted by November 30th. And also, in between that time, between now and November, whatever amount of meetings or times we need to get small groups and large groups together as a representative group of the stakeholders here in Upper Dublin, we will do that also. So as we think about where we have been, this is the previous strategic plan. And when I say previous, it's really the same current plan, because this plan goes to July 1 of 2019. So if you look at what we're working on right now, there's two main goal areas: student achievement and school district climate. Under that, we have some strategies that further define those goal areas. And then further defining those goal areas and strategies are the action plans. So when you look at this particular slide of student achievement, we were looking at standards-aligned curriculum, we were looking at technology integration, professional development, and curriculum renewal. And then under that are action plans that support those strategies, which in turn support the goal areas. The second goal area of school climate, we had strategies of academic access, community engagement, and educating the whole child. Then under those strategies are action plans. So this is the current plan we're still implementing. So as we go forward developing the next comprehensive plan, some of these pieces will still be incorporated. There's pieces like facilities and finance that are very important coming forward with the district. So we will look at those pieces and incorporate them into the comprehensive plan. But this is really a community effort. It involves your parents, your staff, you as board members, our students, the business, and the community. So it's a really important process to go through as we develop what we're doing here in the next 3 years in Upper Dublin. At your place settings as board members, I left you a SCOT analysis, and I'd like you not to fill it out tonight, but take it home with you, give it some thought. From your perspective as a board member, strengths, challenges, opportunities, threats, and fears. And then that 30,000-foot view as a board member, what do you feel the strengths are that we can celebrate in Upper Dublin? What are the challenges you see going forward the next 3 years? What are opportunities that we could look at as we develop the plan? And then what are those threats and fears that you worry about as board members? As we go forward, we're going to be working with the community on surveys, asking questions like this to give your input on what are the strengths, what are the challenges, what are the opportunities from your perspective. So each of you brings something special to the table that help us develop a really reliable, a really reality-based comprehensive plan. So that was the 30,000-foot view. Like I said, when you looked at the timeline, it's months worth of work. I appreciate the work that your superintendent and your leadership team have already started with the process. There's a lot of pieces in the requirement of the web tool that must be completed by the administrative team, but the most important piece is to have that feedback, that input from the community of Upper Dublin. So I'd be happy to answer any questions for clarification, any questions that you might have about the process.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Parati.
You're quite welcome.
Questions from the board? Ms. Teacher?
Thanks for your presentation. I have a quick question, and maybe this is more my language than anything else. When you say continually recreates itself, recreates, can you explain a little bit more what you mean by that?
Yes, that's a great question. As an organization, as a district, we have initiatives, we have accomplishments, we have things that we're doing in the district. And we're a good district, we're a great district, we always want to get better. So the continuum is you constantly want to look at how you can be a better district. That's why I say it's important to think about the strengths and accomplishments, but what are those challenges going forward? What are those opportunities in the next 3 years? Like if we go back to this slide with the bridge right here. So we have those dreams and visions right now going forward for Upper Dublin. What do we want to do turning it into action? So when we look at that quote, that beginning quote, you constantly want to get better. I always use the analogy, if you've had the opportunity to read Jim Collins' book, Good to Great. If you haven't as a board member, it's an awesome book, and for the community and people here in the public, his book, Good to Great, talks about organizations that are really good, that are excellent, but you can get complacent if you don't think about how you can get even better. So I hope that answers your question. Any other questions?
Dr. Kim.
Yeah, you had mentioned on May 1st that different district stakeholders will be part of that process. Could you elaborate on how those stakeholders will be chosen? So you mentioned students and whatnot.
Yes. Normally, and it's always customized for every district, we wanted to have that date of May 1st out on the calendar. And so we'll be following up with a press release and details that if any community members interested in participating, we're working on that process, how they can let us know that they'd be interested in being a part of that steering team. Now, the flip side is there are requirements from the Department of Education. There's a minimum of 6 teachers, 2 from each level, that must be chosen by the teachers. There's 2 educational specialists, which are your guidance counselor, nurses, technology instructors. They must be chosen by that group. The board can give us names of parents, community, and business members that are interested, and that must be approved by the board. So there's certain technical requirements that we'll go through with you as we go through the process. But that's just the minimum, so we can add more people to the process. Like I was saying, they don't require board members. It's so important to have board members. They don't require students. It's so important to have students. So I don't know, does that answer your question? Okay, yes. Another question?
Well, moving forward, we will also be doing a survey of the community. I believe that the results of that survey will serve also to guide us toward membership on this work group. If a particular area of interest is really stressed by respondents, then I think we have to pay very close attention to that. So there are, as Joanne said, there are requirements not only for certain people holding certain roles, but who selects those people holding those roles. And then it becomes a little more open-ended. So we will work with the board following the surveys to determine how we're going to move forward with that.
Any other questions?
Anything else?
Another question?
Sharpia?
No. I just want to alert you to something you may be aware of or not, but the EAC did recently a report based on responses from alumni, and that would possibly be a good resource
terrific.
as well.
That would be great. As we go through this process, when you look at the timeline of January to March, collecting data, needs assessment, that's perfect. So any kind of surveys that have been done or data that we have from alumni, that would be wonderful. That's very helpful. Any other questions?
Any other questions from the board? Okay, thank you, Ms.
Great. Thank you so much.
Ms. Bray will get ready for the third presentation, which is about the revenue budget 2018-2019. While she's getting ready, I just wanted to acknowledge these wonderful thank you notes that have come from the Fort Washington Service Council. I believe they're all from Fort Washington, thanking the board for the work that we do. So again, please thank is anybody here from Fort Washington? Well, thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Yes. They're all custom written and thank yous for everything. So we appreciate it. Okay, Ms. Bray, revenue budget?
Revenue budget for 2018-19. We did discuss this actually in our Finance Committee meeting in January, but we've updated it because some changes are happening. First of all, I want to go back and just highlight some things. Last month in January, the board adopted the opt-out resolution. Then again, we talked about the 18-19 revenue budget. And this year, we also discussed the operations or facilities budget. Mr. Lester came and talked to us about his plan for 2018-19. Negotiations with UDETSPA, the support staff, those began, and staffing meetings started. Tonight, revenue budget, our Finance Committee meeting will be on February 22nd. We will be discussing expenditures and what we refer to as expenditures part 1. We'll be discussing a number of functions, major areas of the budget at that meeting, starting with vocational ed and running through debt will probably be the largest dollar amount that we will discuss that evening. And staffing meetings do continue during February. In March, we're planning on bringing in our health care consultants to talk to us about where we are with health care for 2018-19 and actually where we are in the current year as far as in the consortium, how we're going to land financially, and that will be quite an extensive conversation. In addition, at the legislative meeting that month, we will look at expenditures part 2, and you will see staffing meetings continue. And then something that's important for the public to note, every year the homestead application deadline with Montgomery County Assessor's Office and residents can be approved for a homestead exclusion. This really doesn't change for those of us who have owned property from the previous year, but we need to make sure that we send out applications to all new homeowners or homeowners who have moved during the year. In April, we'll have at the legislative meeting expenditures part 2. Again, Finance Committee meetings at that point will start focusing on budget update. The Secretary of the Budget will certify the property tax relief at the state level, and we'll calculate what that amount will be for each resident in Upper Dublin for 2018-19. And staffing meetings will conclude. That's probably optimistic. We usually run into May. And then in May, PDE will notify us of the funds available for the property tax relief that I just mentioned. The county assessor will provide the certified report on the number of homesteads. May 7th, we'll have board action on the 18-19, what's called the proposed final budget, a vote that night. Finance Committee, budget update, transfers to other funds. That's very important. We look at where we are with revenues from one-time funds and usually set money aside in the capital projects fund, perhaps debt service, but the last few years it's been capital projects. And then we have a deadline to make the 18-19 proposed final budget available to the public. And in June, basically, we have to advertise our intent to pass the budget, and then we board will be asked to take action for the final time on the 18-19 budget. PDE requires that we file the 2028 with them, with that office, and then tax rates also have to be filed with DCED, the Department of Community and Economic Development. Okay, with that behind us, revenue budget for 2018-19 now is estimated to exceed $100 million, with $81 million coming from local revenue, $18 million from state, and approximately $459,000 from federal revenue. 2 months ago, we looked at this slide, assessment change. We were talking about what a 2.4, remember that's the opt-out percentage, the opt-out resolution. 2.4 is the Act 1 index for the school district of Upper Dublin for 18-19. And we were talking about how much money that would, revenue that would generate. But our real estate tax revenue is really a combination of two things: the millage rate as well as the assessment. And we've had some positive assessment changes, so Ms. Baltasano and I were talking about it. We really should look at those two pieces separately. So at July 1 on 2017, you can see that the assessment for the school district of Upper Dublin was $2,260,448,775. On January 31st, that had grown by over $13.5 million. That $13.5 million at the current millage rate generates about $434,000 of additional revenue. If we looked at what the Act 1, that 2.4, and right now it's all in, it generates $1,748,318 for a total amount of increased revenue at this point in time of $2,182,000. Our first slide that we'll look at in detail is budget versus estimate. That's for the current year. You'll notice that we have had a few changes, mainly positive as you run down the list, but not all of them. Real estate taxes are continuing strong, and real estate taxes include not only the one-time bills that go out at the first of the year, it also includes interim bills, public utility, and payment in lieu of taxes. And this year, we actually received a substantial amount of payment in lieu taxes related to the Madison estates. And next year, if they're not building yet on that property, we will receive another payment in lieu of taxes. So that's what basically comprises the increase there for real estate taxes. Earned income tax, I've actually talked with Berkheimer, and our $5.25 million is at the top end or the far right of their expectation for what we will yield this year. Transfer tax, we are having another banner year in transfer tax. Selling of properties, not only residential properties, but properties located in the Fort Washington Office Park. Interest, while our interest rates are increasing on our investments and that amount is growing, that has a downside of future borrowings. Those interest rates will be higher as well. And tuition, that's the negative piece on this screen that I went to go over. But it's really not negative. We ended up receiving all of the money, tuition that was owed for the villa last year. So that's positive. That's behind us and it's closed down. But since we received the money in 16-17, it's a negative variance for the current year. Local revenue moving forward, 17-18 versus 18-19. And again, I want to call your attention to the first line of this slide. Real estate taxes is showing a 3.32%, and we talked about the maximum amount that a maximum tax increase is 2.4. Well, again, that assessment that I discussed earlier is generating more revenue coming in on that line item, as well as we've got some development going on, the Regency and Washington Manor, and so we have some transfer or interim taxes going in for those particular developments. EIT is based on earned income taxes, based again on conversations with Berkheimer, and the transfer tax is, we're going to increase it by $200,000. But we'll be monitoring it closely through the rest of the year. I want to pause with delinquent real estate taxes. You'll notice the amounts going down. Well, that's because we have a smaller number of taxes liened on January 15th. That's really favorable in the short term because that means we're collecting more money in the current year and deferring less of it or collecting less of it after a property is liened. And in fact, we will be looking at that amount again because we received in late January, early February, a substantial payment on delinquent real estate taxes. So that number probably will be adjusted, or that line item. Interest income, same response as previously. Tuition, no revenue will be received from Philly because of what used to be called the villa. So that needs to be pulled down even more. And so that's the total revenue. We were seeing a positive variance this year of 3.42%. Now for state revenue. On February 6th, we heard from Governor Wolf with his proposed 18-19 budget address. His K-12 education priorities, basic ed funding increased $100 million, $20 million for special ed, $40 million increase for early childhood education, and $10 million for career and technology technical centers. Approximately 150 of that, is slated to come to the district. Basic ed and special ed, you'll see the amounts on the screen. 17-18, we're expecting an additional $52,000. 18-19, an additional $76,000 on top of that. And special education, much smaller amounts. So we have total increase of approximately $150,000. Just as a point of reference, basic and special ed comprise about 0.15% of the revenue budget for the school district of Upper Dublin. Now, this is terrific to have this good news, but obviously there has to be a lot of conversation and voting that needs to take place in Harrisburg before we're sure how this money is going to be funded. So I'm not necessarily, although I did include it in the budget, that's an update since our January Finance Committee meeting. We'll see what really lands by June 30th. So state revenue, this is simply walking through each of the line items that I've already summarized with current year, the $51,703 for basic ed, $12,000 for special education. Transportation is estimated. It's based on an annual report that goes into PDE. Rental subsidy is calculated. That's PlanCon money that we discussed quite a bit. It's calculated based on a formula. And later tonight, the board will be voting on the submission of PlanCon J for the high school. That's the final two reviews of 2 out of 3 reviews of money that was spent here. We needed to have a PlanCon audit, and then we needed to have the independent auditor come in. So we may have some more money moving forward, but it will be a very small percentage. Social Security reimbursement, this number will change depending upon how the expenditures. The Commonwealth reimburses 50% of Social Security and PSERS expenditures. So right now there's been no changes, but as the expenditures for salaries become clearer, those numbers will change. And lastly, other revenue. Again, I'm going back to the tuition related to the villa. Very similar comments for comparing 2018, or 17-18 to 18-19. More money in basic ed, $127,000, $21,000 in special ed. Transportation, we're leaving it the same. The rental subsidy is, as best we can calculate at this point in time. Social Security, it's up, and PSERS is up. That's related to the increase in salaries. And for Social Security and for PSERS, it's projected increase in the PSERS rate, which is paid on all salary dollars for 18-19. And once again, other revenue, the $44,000 has to do with the placement, 1305, 1306, the villa. Federal revenue. We have some increases for the first time in a number of years. Title I and Title V have increased allocation. There's also a reduction, as you can see, in Title II. but you will note that we have a substantial allocation, and that's based on eligibility. And what Title I covers is partial expenses, salaries, and benefits for 4 reading teachers. And Title II is professional development to support and improve teaching and student learning. Title III is language instruction for limited proficiency and immigrant students. And then Title IV is student support and academic enrichment. And that's the first time we are to receive that. That's the reason for the 100% increase. It's $10,000. And access is, used to fund a couple of our counselors one at the high school and one at the middle school as well. There are certain steps that we have to go through in calculating the access, and you may be wondering why it's so positive, why we had such a large increase. It really has to do with money that was available from previous years. So you'll notice immediately in the next slide, basically the same situation as far as the allocations for Title I, Title II, Title III, Title IV, and also for access. Just in summary, if you were to look at the revenues that support the School District of Upper Dublin, almost 82% is local revenues. 18% is from the state. I do want to take this moment to point out that over $2 million of the state revenue comes from gaming and helps offset in that homestead exemption that I was talking about much earlier in the presentation. And obviously, we have a very small piece of federal money, 0.5%, even with the increase. I always like to point out that there is about $500,000 that's calculated and handled under local revenue that is truly from federal. It's IDEA, but because it is passed through the Commonwealth, it has to be considered within the local revenue stream. Questions, please.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Bray. Questions from the board? Mr. Sirota?
I'm curious what changed to make us eligible for Title IV money.
It's a new grant award.
The Title IV is,
yeah, it's a new title.
Is totally new.
Okay.
It's part of ESSA. They added it.
Thank you, Dr. Levin.
I was curious why I didn't remember what Title IV was. Okay, thank you. That clarifies it.
There was an old Title IV, which was Safe and Drug-Free Schools, and then went away for a couple of years ago. And this new money is in that same title. But
actually, it's been more than a couple of years. But
about 5. Any other questions? Okay, I have a few, of course. How often you talked about the total assessed value that was calculated in mid-January. At what point do you take that picture? Like, how often do they send you that information in terms of or what the assessed value is? So what number do you use when you do the final budget next year?
They being the county, because this comes from the assessor's office, cut off, and they give us a number at the end of April or so. And that's to permit everybody to do their final calculations. Typically, we do move it along to that. However, if I know there's a large appeal, even though we've included as of January 31st that $2,273,000,000, tonight the board will be voting on
that was my next question.
Approving a stipulation, actually it has on 2 parcels, that will result in a refund for the current year of $132,000, but it also impacts all future years, and so there'll be a future reduction. There are other appeals, and I will try to fine-tune those as to what will be settled within this year and next year as we move through the balance of this budget cycle.
Right, so what we're approving later tonight, I think it's about $4 million reduction?
Of assessed value.
Assessed value? That's not in that number.
That's correct. And you may be talking about fair market value.
Okay.
So, but that's right. But there's other assessment appeals that are out there that we're looking at.
So the increases in basic ed funding and special ed last year, it was not in the budget because of lateness This year, at this time, you have that money, the increase as part of the budget?
Yes.
Okay.
And part of it has simply to do with the minor increases.
Right. And that leads to my next question. On slide 16, when I see the state contribution to PISA is the reimbursement, looking, it's not 16, it's 17, I guess. The additional $858,000.
Yes.
So I'm assuming that we have a bill also
That's
for $858,000.
well, actually, we'll have a bill for almost $1.7 million, twice.
Right,
that
but then
amount.
it gets reimbursed. I mean, out of our pocket comes the $858,000, but they are giving us an extra. Is it a total of $100,000 in basic and special ed? Not
Yes.
even.
Yes.
So this is when we keep saying that even though those two categories continue to increase, because of the pension costs, we keep losing
Every year.
every year. So I just wanted to make that observation. When do we know what schools are going to be identified as Title I schools for next year?
Dr. Miner, do you want to speak to that?
Yes, I've already had to do the calculation for that, and so it will be Fort Washington and Thomas Fitzwater again next year.
Garretttown sometimes is classified and sometimes designated.
That's correct. The way that the calculation is computed is by taking the average free and reduced lunch percentage of the entire district. The elementary schools which fall above that average qualify, and those that fall below do not. And Jarretttown, over the past couple of years, has been within a couple of percent of qualifying.
Okay, thank you. Robert, did I inspire you to ask a question?
Sure, yes, you did. So on the slide before that you mentioned in terms of the real estate changes that happen on slide 9, I'm actually going to reference slide 11. My question is, are those assumptions shown in this particular chart for 2018-19 in terms of those changes of a higher assessed value? So in this slide right here.
This slide right here is calculated based on the amount that was shown as of January 31st,
Okay,
2018.
so they are very good. And
well, they're current. There's going to be changes.
Yes, exactly.
And we'll talk about those, I'm sorry, every
no
month.
problem. And my second question is this also based on the assumption of the 2.4 then in terms of the built-in for this budget right here?
Yes.
Okay,
it's
thank you.
all in right now.
Okay, thank you.
I may have missed it. On slide 13 about the timing on the state budget and when that may ever happen.
I was going to wait until next month to really get into all of those comments. I did allude to that. Excellent point. While the school district and the Board of School Directors here are required to pass a budget before June 30th, it's been quite a while since the Commonwealth had a budget by June 30th of any year. That's also been part of the rationale in the past for not including the money until the following year.
There are those that believe because of it's the election year that this budget cycle may be a bit smoother and maybe get through.
And that's actually one of the reasons that it's in the budget at this point.
Right. Are there any other questions from the board? Okay. Seeing none, I believe we are up to community input. Please come up to the podium, state your name and where you reside in the township, and we will follow the 4-minute rule.
Jenny Vitella, Ambler, and I'm a little off topic from tonight because I had to leave the education meeting early the other night. So I'm sure you're thrilled that you've been waiting with bated breath with what my questions were. I came across, and I know it's anecdotal, I say that word wrong, and I know we don't like that, but I like to see and hear and feel from community members and everything, trends, what people are saying, how people are feeling. And one of the most interesting things to me that I've heard recently is from our Asian community. They've come out in droves on various meetings. I know they're trying to get past some language barriers and even their cultural barriers to express their feelings and their dissatisfaction or their concerns. And looking at demographics, I've heard that our Asian community, which gets a 10 out of 10 on their academic achievement, and as most of our merit scholars and everything else, that the number of Asians coming to our district is reducing compared to what we have. And I think this is a demographic that if they're concerned about some stuff, it seems that we need to look to what they're saying, because this is a great group of great minority to have in our district, and I think they're trying desperately to be heard, and I really think we kind of look at some of those trends. It's interesting to me. The other thing I want to say is I really appreciate that we've added districts that we're looking at to compare ourselves. We have a standard thing. I've been talking about that for a couple of years now. I think that's fantastic. I just have my personal thoughts on that are the district I'd like to get rid of off that list, because it might make us look better than we might be. It's Cheltenham. I don't really want to get down to Cheltenham. Where I would like to see is where I look at every rating. Every time we look at any numbers, any rankings, anything, Radnor and Tredyffrin Easton always seem to be in those top two spots. And I just think adding them and striving to do whatever they're doing might be a goal. Like, that's where we want to be. I don't know what they're doing better than us. I don't know. But whatever it is, I think it'd be interesting to add them and then see how we are. Because it would be great if we were in that spot. Somehow they're figuring it out, and I don't really know what they're doing to get that way. And that brings me to my next question is this U.S. News and World Report, ranking. We used to be in that pretty high numbers for many years, and that was really good for our district, really good for our home values. And I don't say that our school is worse. I don't necessarily agree with that, but I wonder why we're no longer in that. I think as someone who's looking at here, since we were on there for so many years, what has happened, and also along those lines, like, why are we no longer a blue ribbon school? And just anecdotal, it's not even my question. It's a story I heard, is that two professionals looking for different districts, and the answer was, no, I'm not going to go to Upper Dublin. It seems like a great town, but it's just too expensive to live there. We're going to look at Radnor. They're ranked really high. It's not as expensive. And I know it's anecdotal and it's just people talking, but it's that feeling that we really have to concentrate on and give some credence to. And that's just mine. I have a whole other page, but I've run out of time. So anyway, another meeting. Bye. Thanks.
Jen Kuznets, Fort Washington. I just had a couple questions. Who on the board will be visiting the different middle schools? Is it going to be just a small select? Is it the entire board? I'm just curious what that looks like. And then in reading the notes about those two assessments that we've had to lower the value of them, how much does it cost our district to fight that? When somebody appeals their tax or their assessment, like, how do we, and then we decline or deny it, and then they hire attorneys, how much does that cost us? And does it cost more, like, do they have to pay it if we win, or we have to pay theirs, or how does that work? And then I know we talked about the rising interest rates, so when the Sandy Run project was first presented and we had a little chart with the interest rates, how much have they gone up since then, and how much would that affect the quote monthly payment, or however that breaks down? And then I think I just want to clarify something that Ginny was saying about the school districts that we compare ourselves to. I think part of it was the presentation on the PSSAs and things of that nature. Instead of seeing the average of all those districts, because Cheltenham is so much lower that it kind of drags that whole average number down, it would be interesting just in the scheme of the presentation to see what all those individual districts ranked compared to where we ranked, instead of just an average of them, because I think that can be a little bit misleading. We might look better, but with Cheltenham in there, their rankings weren't so good. Thank you.
Anita Brister, Fort Washington. I wanted to start by just going through my thoughts on a comment. I missed the January meeting, but I watched it on tape, and a thought-provoking comment that Mr. Ropsky made, and it kind of got me thinking about whether it really is the only choice to raise taxes or make cuts, because you said, you know, a lot of times it's the only choice, raise taxes or make cuts, and you said something about the state funding. So I guess what I thought about is, and I know this is really a little bizarre, but I have about 20 years of experience with Upper Dublin budgets, for better or for worse. And I really started to think back on the history. Anyway, what I want to say about it is that I would hope that the board, and it really applies, in my view, to every school board, not just a particular board or even a particular district, should really try to make it a goal so that you're not between the proverbial rock and a hard place, raise taxes or make cuts. Because with good financial planning, you rarely need to be at that point. And I'm using 20 years of history to back myself up. What I will say, though, is a few years ago, we had the worst of the worst, which was we had the tax increases and relentless tax increases. And in that particular year that I'm referring to, 2013, 2014, it was 3%, not that bad, but it was on top of many more percent. But we also had cuts. So that's a kind of a problem when you're having relentless tax increases and then you have to also furlough 10 teachers. It's a little bit of a long history there, but that was definitely a board mistake. And it didn't need to happen. It had to do with a overly generous, probably good intentioned contract, but it put a $2.5 million deficit into our budget. And then you had to make 10 furloughs. So you never ever want to get to that point. And then a more recent example is just last year and actually the last 2 years. So the last 2 years, Dr. Michael Resnick was the chair of finance on the board. He just recently retired. And he advocated both of those years for a slightly lower tax increase than what we actually ended up with. Last year in particular, I remember he was a no vote. Whatever the tax increase was, Dr. Resnick voted no to, and he had explained that I think we can go lower, and there were no cuts involved. His point was we can go lower because, it's what you keep telling the community about Sandy Run, the board had taken money from the fund balance and moved it into capital projects fund, whatever it's called, to get ready for Sandy Run. Now, in a way, that's overtaxing. We could have had a lower tax increase the last 2 years. And so now you're putting out literature that says, oh, no, the tax increase for Sandy Run won't be that bad. But what we're not really saying is, because we already taxed you a little bit too much the last couple of years. So we had a healthy fund balance. So that's the finance chair who recommended that. The rest of the board didn't want to do it that way. But my point is, it wasn't a choice between the taxes that we got or a cut. In that case, there was enough of a fund balance that those taxes could have been a little bit lower. So I guess what I would encourage the board to do is hopefully rarely find yourself in a place where that's the only choice. But it has to do with preventive planning and, asking questions and make sure you don't get into kind of putting a deficit in your own budget. Thanks.
Andrew Bush, Jarrettstown. This is to do with, my main topic has to do with Sandy Run, but it's quite lengthy, so hopefully I'll get this in within the next 3 minutes and 45 seconds. First off, I want to say that I am not against a new middle school, but I'm not for it right now. A few of the reasons that I feel this way is, one is there's been a request to the business administration to present the comparison of financial data across the county. I don't think that that's occurred yet. I think there's been a couple requests for that. So I would ask that that be presented, and maybe the taxpaying public, the board, and the committee for Sandy Run would find it very useful and informative to help base their decisions on when the time is right. There's been discussion before about millage rates. Millage rates are high. We're 7th highest in Montgomery County, according to Budget Facts PDF that was on Wissahickons information on their site. We're 7th highest, above the average by 10%. Wissahickons obviously at the lowest. They're 36% lower than us. The tax bill for the median priced home comparisons, 10 years ago, we were 4th highest out of the 22. What are we in 2016-17? We're still the 4th highest, but we're getting much closer to the top. Over the 10-year change, we've got the 2nd highest change, only to Lower Merion, but they had, this past year, had a $134 increase, which put them above us. We have an $11 million fund balance, I think, which is all this additional taxation that has happened to put money on the side for the school, for the Sandy Run project. But we don't really have a rainy day fund. That money is kind of being earmarked for that. We have no place in case there's a downturn in the market and downturn in home sales, and therefore the transfer taxes and all that kind of stuff. Debt service in Colonial School District is roughly 6%. Wissahickons, it's almost 0.5%. I believe here it's 15%, which has moved our Moody's ratings down to A3, where Colonial and others might be more at AAA. We have approximately $115 million in debt right now, not to mention another $120 million or so of funding for pensions that has, I believe, not been identified how that's going to be paid for. Additionally, now we're asking for another $70 million for the Sandy Run, which puts us over the $200 million in debt service just for the facilities. We're saying a $45 increase. I think that was a number per household. Is that really what it's going to be? What was told at the time of the referendum for the high school, I don't think that number stayed true over the years. We still don't know what we're going to happen with that small percentage of the federal and state funding, but it is a critical number based on what our room is for margin. We don't have much. We're forgetting about the other elementary schools and what their needs are. $1 million for four schools to maintain those 4 schools is not enough each year. That needs to be increased. I still don't understand what the rush is to move things. Apparently there's us that are kind of against this project right now, but there are other people that are for it. Why not wait until the debt service falls off a little bit more and get there? Lastly, I just want to say that this money can be attributed more can be better spent more toward education of our overall education of the students, academically, socially, athletically. And also, one last thing. I'd like you to, if there's going to be surveys for other things, I would like to see a survey for the Sandy Run project across the whole community. There's ways to get it done. Logistically, it can be figured out. I don't want to hear any excuses about why it can't be for that reason. If there's another reason why, I'd love to know. Thank you. Sorry for the overage.
I'm Bill Swan from Glenside. Dr. Levinovitz, members of the board, Dr. Wheeler. Regarding the Sandy Run plans that we saw 2 weeks ago, group number 3, I think their name was Schrader. I don't remember because I don't have my notes with me. They came out with what they called option 3, option 3A. They did not include a track around the new football field or the planetarium, and they were still over budget. And since that meeting 2 weeks ago, I'm thinking, doesn't that technically, legally make them non-responsive to your request, and therefore they should be just outright disqualified? Another thing I was wondering is the second quarter and midterm grades. When might they be posted to HEC? I see quarter one is there, but I don't see anything posted on Schoology. And regarding the revenue increases we heard about earlier, that's really positive news. I was wondering, is there any way to capitalize all that money coming in to pay for the track and for the planetarium? If we could, you don't have to worry about referendums or tax increases or anything like that. I remember in the past few years that the Chinese Association had a New Year's program here at the high school. I haven't seen anything like that this year. I was wondering if there was. I guess the board probably isn't the place to mention it, but there was a comment made about declining Asians coming into the district. I remember a few years ago that being mentioned as a possibility when we were going through budget and cuts and stuff like that. But I'm sure we could get the word out to the Asian community that some of the apparent dips in our performance the past couple of years, they were only blips. Our SATs are really picking back up again, and come on in. You're welcome. We'd love to have you, and it's a great district for you and your kids. A nice program on the select ensembles on last Thursday night. It's a really nice program they have there. I just wish there had been a little bit more attendance. If there's something we could do to increase it a little bit. I'll save some of this other stuff for later. Thank you.
My name is Bill Hubbard from Maple Glen. I'm a 29-year resident of Upper Dublin. I have had a daughter and a son go through Sandy Run in the last 7 years. I'd like to start by thanking Ms. Parati for her comments tonight. I found them interesting and also timely. With that thought, it appears from everything that I'm reading, that I'm seeing, that the Sandy Run decision has been made. My biggest concern is that this decision was made by 9 people based on a task force recommendation rather than through a voter referendum. Other closely related concerns include the continually increasing tax burden, the increasing debt burden, the decreasing financial rating, and the decreasing school ratings and rankings. And although we're told that a comprehensive long-term plan is underway, and we discussed a comprehensive strategic plan tonight, the board has made a huge decision without having the whole picture. This is troubling. I realize that I am almost completely ignorant as to your ability to make these decisions from a statutory standpoint. I also realize that I have not read the Act 1 Act cover to cover. So in some ways, I have no idea what I'm talking about, other than the fact that I open my bill every year. And I've had kids go through the district. My concern is that we're rushing this, that we're not considering all that we need to consider, and that there are other options available.
Anyone else?
Hi, good evening. Joe Holmes from East Orland. My comments are also directed to the Sandy Run Middle School project. A couple of things that concern me. as other residents as well, are number one, the debt service. I know the bonds that are proposed to be issued are what they consider wraparound debt. And in layman's term, that's interest-only bonds, meaning that our debt service, which is expected to drop off significantly after 10 years, actually won't drop off after 10 years. And my concern is, like other residents, what happens if we need to build a new elementary school in 5 to 10 years? A tax increase of $45 for this school might actually end up being a much larger increase for one or two elementary schools. So that's a concern that I have. Jen, you asked about interest increases since the Sandy Run proposal. I can tell you since January 1st, interest rates have gone up about 40 basis points on municipal bonds, and that translates into about $280,000 extra in interest costs per year. I don't know what a teacher costs, but that's quite a few teachers rather than a new school building. And, I'm not an educator, but I've always led to believe that what makes a school is not really a building, but teachers and students. And if we invest in our teachers, we might get the same results than we get from a new school building. Now, one last point as well. This is a great high school that we built a few years ago. If you look at schools like Masterman in Philadelphia, or my alma mater, Central High School in Philadelphia, we don't have a swimming pool. We never had a swimming pool at Central, and I don't think Masterman has a swimming pool as well. So, and I think their performance is probably just as equal as Upper Dublin's. So that's all I have. Thank you.
Okay, seeing no one else come up, we will respond to some of the questions. Mr. Sirota, are you ready to answer some of the questions in your facilities?
Sure. I was actually planning to do some of that later in the meeting, but I'll just do it now.
Okay.
Yes, to be clear, and I apologize, I'll put this on me. I haven't been clear enough. But yes, a decision has been made to build a new building. That decision came after the first phase of our RFP process, where we asked architects to confirm all of the data we had assembled to that point. So we have, I think we have explored all of the possibilities. We have validated the data. We have asked experts. We know what the possibilities are. And the recommendation from our committee was to build a new building. The recommendation from the architects supported that recommendation, or the responses from the architects, supported that recommendation. So we will be building a new building at some point at Sandy Run. At this point, I'll just sort of update where we are in the whole process, although that wasn't any of the questions right now, but I might as well just do it all now. So we are, it does, so Mr. Swan asked about the third architect, it was Schrader, and whether or not that technically disqualified them from the RFP. We are down to 2 architects. It's Breslin and KCBA. So we are not still pursuing Schrader. We do have 2 more visits scheduled to visit middle schools built by those architects, currently scheduled for February 23rd, which is the day after, unfortunately, our next operations committee, but schedules are tough. So we still anticipate recommending one of those 2 architects to the full board at the next legislative meeting on March 12th, or rather approving one of those on March 12th. We would then move into a design phase, which is anticipated to take approximately a year, and there will be ample opportunity for all stakeholders to have input into the design of the building. In parallel, we will continue to develop the long-term capital plan at the Operations and Finance Committee meetings. And so at this point, we expect to continue to move forward through this process, which would result in a new building opening, if all goes well, in the 2021-2022 school year, unless something comes up that forces or recommends a delay. There were some other, so that answers, I think, some of the questions. Let me just, I think there was more.
Which board members will be visiting?
Which board members? So the
how many?
There's an internal team we call the organization team that is visiting. We've extended that invitation to the full board, and some have replied. I don't have replies from everybody yet, so I don't know exactly who will be going. It will at least be me and Dr. Levinowitz, and I think Titia, Dr. Ludwig, at least those, maybe more, and a whole bunch of administrators as well. Dr. Wheeler, Dr. Clark, Brenda, Mr. Lester. I'm not sure who else yet, but that's the team that will be visiting on the 23rd. And those are probably will probably be the end of school visits at that point. The schools we're visiting are Northampton Middle School in Northampton School District, and I think it's Northampton Area School District, if I remember correctly, and Nitchman Middle School in Bethlehem School District. And both of those are middle schools of roughly comparable size. Nitchman is actually almost exactly the same size. They're both on heavily sloped lots, multi-story buildings. We will see them in action on a school day. Let's see. Why don't we move on, and I will find other questions on this to answer.
Okay. Let me start from the top with Jenny. With the trends for what's happening with our Asian community, Dr. Wheeler? Yeah.
Thank you. Yes, we are gathering and reviewing data on those trends. We're hearing the same comments. We're going back to the data, gathering that, and doing some disaggregation, looking at that. The standard list for comparison, thank you for that suggestion. We will take a look at that. The U.S. News ranking, and I think Dr. Ludwig, if she wants to get into a detailed discussion of that, the bottom line is they have certain filters that they put into place, and you have to pass those 3 filters in order to be ranked in their rankings. As did our state data reports within the last several years. They've started to look more at disaggregating by subgroups, looking at growth in subgroups. That is the area where Upper Dublin continues to have difficulties, which is why we are putting so much attention to that in our schools. That is the first filter, and for the last several years, we did not pass that because of our, for lack of a better term, achievement gap. Again, we're very cognizant of that, and we're putting a lot of attention to that into our programs and our curriculum moving forward. Why not Blue Ribbon? We have not applied for Blue Ribbon in the last several years, something we certainly could talk about. It takes a great deal of time and effort. That has just not been raised as a question. If I may jump ahead. Mr. Bush. Mr. Swan, I'm very happy to share that on Thursday, May 3rd, from 5 to 8 o'clock, we will celebrate our Asian American Heritage Dinner, and I believe that's in the cafeteria. So you're welcome to join us for that. I think that's all I have right now, unless you see something else that I should address right now.
Just Jenny's comment that we're not a Blue Ribbon school. We are a Blue Ribbon high school. We did get that recognition in the late 90s. We haven't reapplied, but we are a Blue Ribbon at the high school and some of our other buildings. Do we reapply? We could reapply, but we haven't. The assessment appeals, Ms. Bray, Ms. Kuznets wants to know, I guess what she's asking about is the legal costs associated with them. How it's calculated and who pays it.
Every assessment appeal has legal costs associated with it, and certainly our solicitor, the attorneys I work with on each one of the appeals, we do pay invoices on the legal costs. But in addition to that, there's appraisers
and the three taxing bodies do share the cost of any appraisers moving forward. And as far as trying to figure out a calculation, there is no per parcel set amount. It really depends upon how long it's been sitting and obviously the circumstances that surround the property. That's not a very definitive answer, but it's very variable.
And those legal costs are paid not only by the district, but a proportion is paid out by township?
Not a proportion. The township and the counties support their own legal costs.
Right.
I'm sorry. So sometimes when we are sitting around a table, maybe trying to mediate, or at a hearing, which occurs, there may be an attorney from each of the taxing bodies, plus the Board of Assessment may send their own attorney.
Okay. Ms. Cousins asked about the rising interest rates, and we are aware of those rising interest rates. For those that attended that board meeting with PFM, just to remind you that they said their numbers were very, very, very conservative. I think when they come back, I think we'll probably be where they projected us to be. They've always presented very, very conservative numbers, assuming that rates will be going up, and they have gone up a bit in the past few weeks. The second time I heard a comment about the high school referendum, how the tax increase was higher. The tax increase, you won't believe me, but I'll say it anyway. The tax increase was not higher than we told the community. We told the community it was going to be 16%. It was less than 16%. It was what we anticipated the tax increase to be. If you have any other data, please share that with us, because it was what we told the community. I want to look at my notes. Anybody else from the board? Dr. Ludwig?
I think there was a comment about wraparound debt being interest only. I don't believe that's the case. Wraparound debt, in this case, what we're doing is spreading the payments based on what our current debt payments are. So it does spread them out a little bit more over time, but what that does is smooth the payments so that you don't have, one that's 10 million and then the next one that's 16 million. It makes planning and budgeting much easier, even though the total costs are a little bit higher.
And if I may, on top of that, Act 1 does not permit us to go up and down as far as expenditures easily. So we try to keep our debt and most other expenses as level as possible, so that we can budget and plan for multiple years. It is not just interest only. It is trying to keep the debt at a constant rate.
Can I just follow up on that one? To clarify the interest-only comment, I think what that's getting at, it's an oversimplification, but it does, the earlier years compared to just paying at a flat rate the way you typically would like on a home mortgage, the earlier years have a higher percentage of interest and a lower percentage of principal. They're not truly interest-only. There is still some principal, but because the interest is paid in larger chunks in the later years, the total interest is higher because of the accrual of that debt over time. So the principal doesn't get paid down as quickly, so the interest is higher. So there's a nugget of truth in there, but interest only is an inaccurate term.
But in addition to that, usually when you sell bonds, the longer out that you sell the bonds that are 15 years old, 10 years, we tend to pay a higher rate of interest because of the unknown. So the shorter term bonds that you usually are selling are at a lower rate. So consequently, if you don't refund or have the opportunity to restructure debt, again, you are paying more interest in the later years for yet another reason.
Since the inception of Act 1, only 2 districts have gone out for referendum, front-end referendum. That one is the Upper Dublin School District for the high school, and the other one is State College. I went out for less money to do a couple of renovations. It is not the practice in the state to go out for referendum when you're building a building. Look at what is occurring in our neighboring districts. Abington has just passed a bond for $90 million. That did not go out on referendum. $90 million to do renovations at their high school and grade realignment between middle school and high school. $90 million. Happer Horsham, and not even talking about all the other construction that has occurred in Abington over the past 5 to 10 years. No referendum. Happer Horsham just completed one elementary school. They're looking to do another elementary school, and they're talking about a middle school. They don't go out on referendum. How you pay for construction is by the money that is in the budget, in the general operating, or money that you've put away in capital reserve. That's how districts fund their projects. They do not go out on referendum. So I would not support going out on a referendum to build Sandy Run Middle School. Are there any other, Mr. Sirota?
On that point, Mrs. Brister was saying, I'm paraphrasing, I think, that setting aside money in the way we've talked about setting aside money is effectively overtaxing. It is taxing, revenues exceed our necessary expenditures, so we have extra money that we can set aside or build debt capacity either way. I agree. That is correct. I mean, that the way you build up savings is by having your revenues exceed your expenses. And so districts like you're talking about that have gone out and built a lot of buildings without significant tax increases, the way they've done that is because they have overtaxed effectively enough to build up savings or build up debt capacity to cover the expenses. The only way, I mean, if you have to have a balanced budget, and we do, the only way you can build up savings or debt capacity is by having your revenue exceed your expenses. So if you want to keep your revenue exactly where your expenses are, then you can't afford to do that. You can't afford to borrow, and you can't afford to build without borrowing. Either way, you have to build up capacity somehow. So I do agree that is effectively overtaxing. And in a long time ago, when we used to say, or it has been said, I wasn't around, that Upper Dublin was such a good value because the taxes were low and the achievement was high. There wasn't enough capacity in the budget. There wasn't taxed enough to build up enough to build this building. So we had to go to referendum. If taxes had been higher in the years leading up to that, maybe that wouldn't have been the case. So, it just has to be done one way or the other. It's just different strategies for. Neither one's worse or better or anything like that. It's just different strategies. But one way or another, if you want to do expensive things, you have to raise money to do those expensive things. Certainly people can make the decision, Anita, you said it wasn't a choice at that time between taxes and cuts. It's sort of a definition of cut, right? I mean, people have different priorities for the money. Some people could say that if we spent a certain amount of money on building a new building and don't spend that amount of money on, say, hiring new staff, that's effectively a cut. You're not hiring the staff that you could have hired. So it's all just a matter of balancing all these things. But I wanted to make the point that, it's overtaxing. You have to tax enough to have your revenues exceed your expenses. Let's see. A couple people said the bond rating isn't that high. Well, yes. AA3 is not as high as AAA or AA2. But it's high. I mean, it's a very good bond rating. And actually, someone said the bond rating has been decreasing. I've lost track of who that was. Mr. Hubbard, I think. That is not true. Our bond rating actually is increasing. That's AA3 is the highest it's been in quite some time, and has been reaffirmed at least twice since it got to AA3. So it is high and getting better. It's not an A+, in our normal grading sort of system. It's not a AAA, but it is a high score. Let's see. Mr. Swan asked, is there any way to capitalize that new money from the increased assessment? Well, that's effectively what we're talking about. As the assessment rises, revenues rise, capitalizing that money means setting it aside in the capital projects fund, and that's what we typically do with when we get one-time revenues, and someone can make the argument that that's overtaxing, but that is, yes, capitalizing that new money is effectively what we're doing. I want to comment on Mr. Hubbard's comment that the board has made a decision without having the whole picture. I just really strongly disagree with that. It is our job to have the whole picture. We work very hard to have the whole picture. We have gone way beyond what most districts do in terms of building the whole picture before making this decision. I just fundamentally disagree. I think having the whole picture is exactly where we are, and people can certainly disagree on the decision that's made as a result of the information that we have, but I just think it's flatly wrong to say we don't have the whole picture. And then Mr. Holmes said, what makes the school is not the building, invest in the teachers. I'm paraphrasing. Yeah, well, as I've said at past meetings, our teachers are our most expensive resource, and we need to maximize their effectiveness. We need to invest in them to get the best result out of them in order to get the best results for our students. And part of investing in our teachers is giving them the resources they need to do their best job. And the current middle school, what we've learned through this entire process, the current middle school does not serve the needs of teaching modern middle-level education well. So our teachers do well in spite of our building, not because of it. It shouldn't be that way. So investing in our teachers, investing in our building, in this building, is investing in the teachers. I have some other comments I can make about Mr. Bush's, but I'll release the floor for now.
Okay, Mr. Swan, you asked about the hack. I'm almost sure there was a listserv from Mr. Schultz that said that they were coming out any day. So I would go back and look for that email. I don't know if we have any other high school parents, but yeah, so he did indicate when it was going to be released and how to access it. Okay. Anyone has anything else before Mrs. Sirota reads over his notes?
I have a couple.
Okay, Dr. Ludwig.
I recently looked up, and I can't remember all the numbers, but the number of school districts of the 500 in the state that have a AAA bond rating is 6. Most of them are around our region, and they are the schools that are really what we would consider wealthier in terms of assessed values. So I wanted to say a couple more comments. These are really in response to a couple things that a number of different people have said. People have suggested that there are many things we could do with our money. I mean, if we look at, we have a certain amount of money in our reserve. That's money that we could use once. We have a certain amount of capacity to pay debt service, excuse me, in our budget, which is, if we keep that line item in the budget, we would have that every year. I mean, that's what we're looking at to pay the debt service for any new borrowings. Now, a number of people have said we should be using that money to pay for teachers, to create a rainy day fund, to reduce our taxes. So, I mean, some of those things, like if we use that money to lower our tax increase, then that happens every year. That means we have lost the capacity to borrow money. So saying we should do that for a couple years and then we can take on the Sandy Run project doesn't really work, because we no longer have that capacity. So in terms of our planning, yes, we've been taxing ahead, if you want to call it that. You can also call it good planning ahead. So we can't use it more than once. So if we use it to pay for teachers, that's a recurring expense. We can't use it for something else. If we use it to reduce our taxes, we can't use it for something else. If we use it To do any of those things other than build a Sandy Run project, we need to use some of it or our reserves to maintain the school for another few years until we get to the point where we can do a project. So when you put all those things together, it seems like deferring does not make sense to me. That's
Thank you, Dr. Ludwig. Anyone else from the board? Dr.
Sure.
Kim.
If I could actually just speak to the Asian American matters. In terms of the conversation that we'll continue to have with the community, we will. Dr. Wheeler had already mentioned that we will look into the data as appropriate. I will also want to just say that in terms of a district, I think we're one of the few districts in terms of the Asian American Students and Families Equity and Excellence Group that is doing some stellar work in particular for that community, one of which is this week is celebrating Lunar New Year. Part of that was a provision with an in-service that also allows kind of them to be able to have that as a celebration of a day that they're able to do. Asian American Heritage Month is actually May. Most people don't even recognize that, which that celebration is falling in that month. And again, I think in terms of districts in all of Pennsylvania, there's not many that the board or the district has made that provision to really be able to honor a part of the community that we have here in Upper Dublin. So simply just to point out that we will continue to dialogue and make Upper Dublin really a desirable place, not just for Asian Americans, but really for all of our students here in the district.
Thank you, Mr. Kim. Mr. Rofsky?
Yeah, I'm just, Mark and Joan said a lot of suggestions or what we were doing is that's the proper planning that we're doing. Having a down payment on Sandy Run, if we were building a new Sandy Run, won't be good for our bond rating. You need to have a large down payment. That's proper planning. We didn't have a large down payment for the new high school. We learned from that. We're addressing that. Having a positive 3.42% local revenue budget. That's a positive. That's proper planning. It's not a negative. It's a positive. It's proper planning. Setting aside money for health care in case there was expenses that, were surprised. That's proper planning. That's what we're doing. Okay, we started for this Sandy Run having a down payment for Sandy Run a couple years ago. We're working on that. We're adding to that down payment for Sandy Run, and that's what we're trying to do. We are trying to plan this, and us school directors up here have tough decisions. That's why we're up here. It's not going to be fun. And it's not easy. It's hard. We have to juggle taxpayers. We have to juggle the education of our students. And we have to juggle our reputation. It's our reputation that will be on the line when if we approve the new building of Sandy Run.
Any other comments? Okay, we are moving on now.
All right, let me just, one more.
Sorry, Mr. Sirota, I didn't see you.
That's all right. So there are a few from Mr. Bush, but there's one in particular I want to address. Well, two. One I won't really answer. One, why not wait until the debt service falls off more? That really is the only, in my mind, outstanding question. Is there value in waiting? And Dr. Ludwig got to it a little bit. We haven't committed to borrow money in building a building yet in any formal way. My mind right now leans toward there isn't value in waiting. But, I think we need to document that, to demonstrate that over the next several months. And we'll talk about that at, Finance and Operations Committee meetings as part of the long-term capital plan. The question was, would you like to see a community-wide survey across the community? My question about that is, what would the question be? Because I don't think you can just ask, assuming you want to make it a relatively simple survey, you can't just ask, do you think we should build a new middle school or not? Because it just ends up begging more questions. You need to ask, because some people will say yes because I want a new middle school. I want something new. Some people will say no, I don't, because that sounds expensive, or because I think we should do something else with the money, or because I'd like my taxes to be lower, or because whatever. The question, when people say no, they might not be saying, it's not that I want, in fact, you said it, it's not that I don't want a new middle school, it's that I would like this, and, this is a higher priority for me. So so it's not hard technically to send out a community-wide survey, we have to be conscious of, people who aren't electronically connected and all that kind of stuff. But it can be done. But coming up with the question is hard. I mean, it's our job to get really well educated about all the possibilities and that kind of thing. But educating, and I know those of you who are here often and are paying attention are much better educated than most, but most people don't understand the complexity of the question, and it would be very hard to get at in a survey. So I'm not opposed to doing it, but I would want to do it only if I thought we could get a meaningful answer, and it's a difficult question to ask. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Serrata. Okay, looks like we are moving on. We are up to number 6 in our agenda, which is announcements and communications. Ms. Bray.
There are none this evening.
Okay, do we have some minutes to approve?
We certainly do. We have minutes from December and January committee minutes, as well as our special legislative committee meeting in January for approval.
Okay. Is there a motion to approve the minutes? Mr. Serrata made the motion. Is there a second? Dr. Kim, any comments or questions? The board has time to review the minutes until today. Seeing no comments or edits, so those in favor, approval of the minutes tonight, please say aye. Aye. Anyone opposed? Okay, Education Committee, Dr. Ludwig.
Tonight, there is the enrollment report is number A, as usual. That's for information. There are 3 motions. Agreement of understanding, young readers, writers and young readers, student activities and conferences. All of those have been discussed at the Education Committee meeting, and so I would like to put them all, move that they all be approved together.
Okay, is there a second? Second, Ms. Sherpia. Okay, any comments or questions? Those are the 3 items under education curriculum recommendations. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Anyone opposed? Okay, nothing under technology tonight. Pupil services, Dr. Kim.
Sure, it's to approve the 2 motions that are listed. One is the service agreement, one educational agreement as listed.
Okay, motion is made. Dr. Kim. Okay, is there a second? Second, was that Dr. Ludwig? Second. Any comments or questions? Seeing none, all those in favor of the pupil services recommendations, please say aye. Aye. Anyone opposed? Moving on to our lengthy Operations Committee recommendations tonight. Mr. Serrata.
One item on the agenda, it is our regular obsolete equipment item. I find it an absolutely fascinating list. There are some mini computers from the 1980s. I'm really curious where those were living all this time. Along with some other things like ping pong tables and a variety of other things. But anyway, I'd like to make that motion that we approve disposing of this equipment.
Okay, motion made. Second. Okay, Dr. Ludwig, second. Any comments or questions? It's the one item. Seeing none, all those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Anyone opposed? Moving on to the Finance Committee recommendations, Dr. Ludwig.
Okay, there are 6 motions for tonight. I will take the first 2, the treasurer's report and payments first, and I move we accept those.
Okay. Second, okay, Ms. Francis, second. Any comments or questions on that? I just wanted to bring the board's attention to the investment accounts, other district funds, capital projects, and our debt service. We were talking quite a bit tonight about that. Currently, the total is a little over $9 million, but I do know we have some bills that need to be paid. So we have 6.5 in capital projects and nearly 2.5 in the debt service, and I'm sure we'll be having additional transfers made this school year.
Yes, and as far as the outstanding bills, we have some buses to pay for.
Right. Okay, no other comments or questions on items A and B. We had a first and a second. Okay, all those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Anyone opposed? Okay, continuing.
So I would like to take E and F together. Both of those were discussed at the Finance Committee meeting, and I move we adopt those.
Okay, a second? Amy. Second, Ms. Francis, second. Any comments or questions? Only comment or question I have, Ms. Bray, if you can just summarize what PlanCon J was, and are we done with the high school PlanCon project documents?
Again, it was, as I mentioned during the budget presentation, it's a review and classification of the monies that were expended to build the high school. Every year when we were building and spending the money, all the funds were subject to the individual audit or yearly audit of the independent auditors. Now we've had somebody with a specialty come in and put everything into the PlanCon, required PlanCon forms. That was audited by our independent auditors. With the approval tonight of the board, we will submit it to the Pennsylvania Department of Education for their review and for PlanCon's review. And when it is approved, what ultimately happens is that all of that funding is, all those different funds will be assigned a permanent reimbursement percentage.
Okay, how much data are we talking about when the auditor came in? How many boxes were there? Or?
Yes, we had 17 boxes, banker boxes of documentation that we had to go through. It's organized, obviously, and they were looking at certainly a lot of the payments for the soft costs and the hard costs of the high school, as well as all the various PlanCon approvals that had to be obtained while the building, before the building even started.
And the finding, the major finding, what was the result of the audit? Was there a conclusion that everything was?
Everything was handled and paid appropriately.
Okay.
Now we just have to wait for PlanCon PD to accept that.
Right. And reimbursements continue.
Of course.
Hopefully. Okay. Dr. Ludwig, that was E and F, right? Okay. We had a first. We had a second. I see no other comments or questions. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Anyone opposed? Okay. Two more?
Okay, there are two more. I'll take them separately. First is C, which is a motion to approve stipulation and settlement agreements for the tax year 2017 for two parcels located at 500 Virginia Drive between the district, the Upper Dublin Township, the Montgomery County Board of Assessment Appeals, and property owner BACM 2007-5-500 Virginia Drive. It's 500 Virginia Drive, LLC. So, and these are for a total of $132,683.
Second? Okay, Ms. Francis, second. Comments or questions about the settlement stipulation? All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Anyone opposed? And last?
Okay, and D, the Montgomery County Intermediate Unit Member Services Budget for 2018-2019. So the motion is to approve this budget as approved by the Board of Directors of the Montgomery County Intermediate Unit. And, okay, that's the motion.
Second, Ms. Francis. Comments or questions?
I guess the only comment is that there has been no increase in this budget over the last 4 years, and the portion of the MCIU budget that is allocated to member districts is about 1% of their total budget. Most of the rest comes from grants and state and federal and other sources, and fees for service.
Okay. We had a first and a second. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Anyone opposed? Okay. Personnel. Ms. Francis.
Yes. We have 3 items tonight to discuss and or to make a motion. The first A is new supplemental software to enhance current software for human resources related to applicant tracking. Item B is of note. It is our consulting agreement with the Chester County IU, the intermediate unit, who we've chosen to support our superintendent search. And item C, which is the personnel report regarding various personnel moves in the district.
Is there a second? Second, Dr. Ludwig. Comments or questions? In the personnel report, you'll find the motion to approve Ms. Kim Schuler as the interim assistant principal of our high school to replace Mr. Thompson, who left. We will be doing a search over the next few months for a permanent assistant principal. And I just wanted to congratulate Ms. Schuler. Okay. Any other comments or questions? Seeing none, approval of the personnel report. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Anyone opposed? Okay. Dr. Kim, policy.
Sure. The first is just to receive the update to Administrative Regulation 219, which is actually in reference to Mrs. Schuler. And so you can please note that in the update of the AR. The second is a motion B to D to receive the following policies. The first is the second reading of Policy 213 under Special Education. There are 5 ARs, 113.1, 113.2, 113.3, dealing with IDEIA, Section 504 in gifted education. Policy AR 202 and AR 233. There's a first reading of the following policies: 207, confidential communication from students; 208, withdrawal from school; 209, health examinations; 223, use of bicycles and motor vehicles; and lastly, 224, care of school property.
Second.
Second, Mr. Sirota.
I also just want to, just a correction, Dr. Kim, on item B said 213 and he meant 113. Yeah. 113. Just want to clarify that for the record.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments or questions? We have first and a second approving, is for approval of the policy committee recommendations tonight. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Anyone opposed? Okay. Other business, EAC report, I believe. Ms. Sherpier?
Okay, we've received a report enrichment and investment in all Upper Dublin students by the EAC with authors Amy Franchek, Karija Kamal, Cynthia Song, Heather Tarucci, and Lynn Unicle. And we'd like to accept that report.
Okay. Do that item separately, I assume then. Okay, is there a second? Dr. Ludwig? Okay, this is item A under other business, the AC report to accept it. All those in favor, any comments or questions? Okay, seeing none, all those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Anyone opposed? Thank you. Item B.
All right, it's another EAC membership change. Lisa Lee resigned and Heather Harrington is appointed.
Okay, second, Dr. Ludwig. All those in favor of the appointment and resignations, EAC members, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Anyone opposed? Okay, we are moving on to liaison committee reports. First one, Montgomery County Intermediate Unit. Dr. Ludwig.
The Montgomery County Intermediate Unit met on, the board meeting was on January 24th. As noted before, we approved the budget. The next, other than that, there were just regular items of business. And the next meeting is February 28th.
Okay, thank you. Legislative Committee is Ms. Rothman, who's not with us tonight. Eastern Center for Arts and Technology, I'd like to remind my colleagues and our community that on March 4th will be Eastern Center for Arts and Technology open house from 1:30 to 3. If I know most of our new board members will be attending an orientation earlier in the day, and other board members are invited to tour the facility and have some wonderful refreshments that are provided for the day. Moving on to the Excellence and Equity Steering Committee, Dr. Kim.
Sure. In addition to the fact that it is Lunar New Year this Friday, we want to wish those who are celebrating that Happy Lunar New Year. But there's also Black History Month, which their celebration happens that evening on Friday from 6:30 to 8:30. If you're able to come to the high school, we would love to see people come out and participate in that great event. In addition to that, on February 26th, the Faith-Based Students and Families Group will be meeting. And then lastly, on April 28th, the entire consortium is trying to plan an event together called UD Better Together, starting at 2 p.m., and we would love to invite the community and board members there as well.
Great. Okay, Ms. Sherpier, EAC.
The EAC met and they discussed several of the ongoing projects, but no further information.
Okay, moving on to the Pennsylvania School Boards Association. I'm pleased to announce that on January 31st, I was invited to participate in a board president's panel at Central Technical Center. There was 3 of us on the panel, and in attendance were approximately 20 to 25 other board presidents from neighboring districts. On March 5th, there will be a spring legal roundup, PSBA sponsoring during the day. And also at night, there's a member roundtable and reception, which is occurring at the same time that our education committee is taking place. So there'll be a conflict for some of us. PTA, PTO, Ms. Francic?
Yes. First, I'd just like to say thank you to all of our PTO and PTA volunteers. For the record, they give a tremendous amount of hours. We met with all of them along with the chair people of the SPEAK organization on January the 24th, along with several administrators, and had a very lively discussion. We were grateful to hear their feedback, especially about the issues or concerns at Sandy Run and the high school around vaping and juuling, which led to some of the programming that's been discussed earlier in the meeting. We also discussed various ways for the UDEF to partner with teachers on possible grants, and generally just a very lively and productive meeting. So our thanks to those important volunteers. And we have offered and will continue to offer our time and services to attend meetings, and I'll be sending out an email to the PTO and PTA chairs to set up at least one opportunity throughout the course of the rest of the year for us to meet with them.
Thank you, Ms. Francic. Township, Mr. Rofsky?
We did not meet. Our first meeting will be March 13th.
Thank you, sir.
If I may add to that, just the township does have a survey out for the library, and we would like to just pass that word along, have as many people fill that out as possible. A link to that can be found on the township's website. And while I'm talking about surveys that we have out, our district also has a survey out right now for the Sandy Run schedule. So anyone who has an opinion on the Sandy Run schedule, if you have a student there or any other tie to Sandy Run, we are now 5 months into the new schedule and would appreciate feedback. Our link to that can be found on our website.
Okay, thank you. Upper Dublin Education Foundation, Ms. Good is not here tonight. Again, we'd like to thank the many people who attended the Harlem Wizards fundraiser. It's a fundraiser with the foundation and our UDEA. Highly successful event. And I believe Dr. Wheeler highlighted in her report some of the many activities that will be occurring, sponsored or co-sponsored with the foundation. We are now up to the solicitor's report.
Just the Sunshine Act announcement. February 5th was an executive session regarding personnel.
Thank you, Mr. Roos. We are now up to the second community input. Kindly step up to the podium. State your name, part of the township you reside in, and we will follow the 4-minute timeline.
It's working right now.
Okay.
Jen Kuznets, Fort Washington. A couple questions. I just wanted to clarify, the recommendation from the Sandy Run Task Force was, yes, if we're going to do something, we should build new, but they were very careful and wanted in that recommendation, that we don't do it until we have our financial house in order, in so many words. So I think that's where the argument is coming from, is it's about the finances. Another thing I just wanted to know or kind of clarify is the 16% tax increase for the high school project. Did that include the usual tax increase for the operating budget? Like, I know we're saying it's $45 extra for the middle school, but that doesn't include the usual operating tax increase that we have. So just wanted to get a little clarification on that. You know, Abington and Hatboro Horsham building new, that's great. I'd like to see what their financial picture is, you know, do they only have 20 million in debt, or do they also have 120 million already in debt like we do? And I'd still really like to see a vote on this, we're building new. I haven't seen a vote. I've watched votes on band uniforms. This is a big decision. You're borrowing 70 million, which will end up being 115 or 20 or whatever it ends up being. I want to see where everybody stands. Is everybody a yes, or some no? I'd like to see it. I think the community would like to see it. And then on just a separate note, this is a policy question, Mr. Sigafus, I'm not sure if you could answer it. If someone reports marks on a child and the child is called down to guidance, is that child required to show their arms or whatever it is? What is the policy for a student in that? Where do their rights end or begin? Thank you.
Anita Brister, Fort Washington. I wanted to touch on that topic also of the 16%, Andrew's question, and Jen just touched on it. Art, your answer was fine as far as it went, but it was totally incomplete. Yes, the 16% is what the board and the superintendent at the time predicted the high school would cost, and that's, or tax-wise, it would entail a 16% tax increase for the high school, and that is correct. But the major piece, you don't put it in perspective, and I kind of expect better of you, is all the other operating cost. And that's the problem. And that's why when you put out information, oh, this, you know, Sandy Run's not going to cost that much, but yes, there will be small increases for operating cost. Well, the problem is we were told there'd be small increases then. And I will tell you this, I looked this up today. The 10-year period when Dr. Plattis was here, and I'm using that because that's the period during which the high school was built, Dr. Plattis himself, the night he you know, gave his last board meeting when he retired, I happened to be there, and I happened to look it up today to just double check, he said that he kind of wasn't too proud of the 10-year 79% tax increase. So sure, the high school cost 16% in taxes, but that 10-year period came to 79%. And our past superintendent acknowledged that it was a heavy cost. And actually that night he also acknowledged that losing 10 teachers was a heavy cost too. So it's not just the cost of the building, it is the usual operating cost. If they're really going to be small, and I don't know that the community and the board define small in the same way, then great. But if it's anything close to what we're looking at over the last 15 years, our tax increases don't compare well anymore. Our taxes don't compare well to our neighboring districts. Certainly we look horrible in taxes compared to Wissahickon, but it's not just Wissahickon. And what upsets me is for many, many years, our taxes compared very well. And that's why something Andrew mentioned that you didn't touch on either, he asked for, show us the data of all the districts in Montgomery County. I can tell you that used to be done here in Upper Dublin. We used to be in the middle of the 21 districts. So you had excellent test scores and middle for taxes. It's why people did come here. We're inching towards the top. We're not Cheltenham yet, but some of us are worried that we're getting there. Now, if you have data that can show us that our taxes aren't that bad, and Mark, the millage is not good. Andrew mentioned that. 7th highest is not great. Maybe the newer people don't get it, but Art, you're not one of the newer people. We used to be a really excellent value for the quality of education. Some of us are worried that we will never be that way again. I'm worried.
Andrew Bush, Jarrowtown. A couple things. On the architect's search or on that topic, sorry. I appreciate that you guys have gone down and narrowed it down to 2. I think that's helpful to get to where you need to go for that architect aspect. The one thing that the firm that no longer is in the running made, I believe that the principal there had said something when asked about if the building is the driver of better education, or I'm not sure exactly how the wording was, but he said no, the teachers are, the educators are the most important piece in that puzzle. I don't want us to forget that point that he made. The other 2 architects did not bring that up at all. They went the other way in saying the building will drive that. It's a combination, I get that, but I think that the educators are the bigger part. So some of that other stuff that the architects were showing in that grand view of what they wanted the buildings to look like, we don't need a lot of that stuff. So if you're going to build this, when you build it, I'd like you to kind of look at that. The other part about that is in our current buildings, while it may not be an ideal 21st century learning experience, if you were to replace some of the furniture in some of these areas, maybe that will help facilitate 21st century learning in the existing building for Sandy Run. Mark, I just want to address one thing. I appreciate your response about the survey. A suggestion that you probably saw on Facebook, but was to have the Sandy Run Project Committee potentially take a stab at drafting a type of survey, whether it's 1 question, 5 questions, whatever. Something that's unbiased. I know that there's a large majority of that went toward yes, building the school, but I think that might be the best place to start with trying to come up with certain questions that could potentially yield value in getting the community input. One last thing that I wanted to mention was today, Philadelphia Business Journal had stated something around the top 50 schools with SAT scores. We were 31st on that list in the state, but they had a top 50 only. Ones that were ahead of us in Montgomery County were Worcester, Hicken, Lower Moreland, Lower Murray, and Hardin, and Methacton. 2 of those have slightly higher tax bases than us, while the other 2 are significantly lower. We're kind of right in the middle of that 5, but leaning more toward the higher tax base based on what I just said. I don't know the situation with what the other schools are, but with where their facilities are, but I want to make sure that we pay attention to the facility aspect of this in addition to it. But I think 31st in the state is a great number, and that's with our existing schools that we have right now. So, thank you.
Yeah, Bill Swan from Glenside, Dr. Levinowitz, members of the board, Dr. Wheeler, community. A week ago, we had a program of studies night at the high school. I saw it was done a little differently. I jotted down some notes, some observations at the time. I see that this year everything was centralized. There was a lot less walking around the building. However, I was talking to some of with some of the teachers and stuff there. Teachers do have detailed notes for all their students. However, all the notes are in the classroom. They're not down in the cafeteria, and they're wondering, why should they schlep a whole bunch of boxes of notes about each of their students down to the cafeteria? I found that the cafeteria was too noisy to hear what was being said or to concentrate on when you're speaking with the teachers. And there were groups of people, they were just like congregating in front of the tables. You couldn't really get to the teachers without having to break through groups of people just having sidebar conversations. 45 minutes for the elective fair, I thought that was a little short. You have 5, 6 major classes you're taking. You're trying to do each of those in just a few minutes, and then, yeah, you do save a lot of time not having to run around the building to all the different wings. But it was a little more awkward. I spoke with 7 teachers there, get what their opinion was. 6 of them agreed that, having it in the cafeteria was a little disorganized. And not all of my daughter's teachers were there on hand to speak with regarding recommendations for next year. She's going into 12th grade, so whatever you do next year is not going to really affect me, but I just thought I'd bring that out. What else? The Monco Band performed at Wissahickon on February 2nd. One thing I noticed was that they offered a CD of the evening's performance. So I imagine there are no problems with copyright issues recording and selling a student performance. Maybe that's something we could do here for some of the great performances we have at the high school. I'm sure whoever's making that recording has to do so with the pay something to the school to cover the costs. And then I have here a couple brochures I got in the mail. One from the Abington Adult School, another one from Cheltenham Adult School. Abington offers 59 classes, Cheltenham 96. But I haven't seen any advertisements come for anything at Upper Dublin. I do see that you have a few classes offered on the district website. But I was wondering, maybe you just don't advertise to the local community, but you'd save money by not doing that. But advertising is kind of effective. I signed up my daughter for a SAT math class that they were offering at Cheltenham, and looking forward to that. And I was really hoping there would be some sort of Chinese New Year offering again at the high school. Last year's RFDZ performance was really fabulous. I really liked it. And thank you for all your answers to my last questions.
Okay, nobody's stepping up. I'll we'll close community input, and we will try to answer your questions. Mr. Sirota, are you ready?
I can do some. Ms. Kuznets asked about Abington, Hatboro, Horsham. Do they also have a lot of debt? I don't have the debt numbers in front of me at the moment. I can pull them up. But one thing I can tell you is that they have had historically a very large fund balance. They were among those districts that were effectively taxing in advance. They were taxing such that their revenues exceeded their expenses in order to build up huge fund balances, especially Abington, and therefore are able to absorb more of the cost now of a lot of the building projects that they've been doing. I don't have. It'll take me a minute to pull up current numbers or more current numbers. I think that's all I've got right now. All right.
Okay.
Hold
on.
Would
Ms.
you
Brand?
like for me to maybe?
About debt service?
Yes.
Okay.
I'm looking at, just to clarify, in November we did do the comparative summary information, but it was at the Finance Committee meeting. It was not at the legislative meeting. And there's been a number of questions about debt, where we stand. According to the information compiled by the Montgomery County IU for the most recent year-ended compilation, which is June 30th of 2016, we were number 3. However, I have a pretty good idea and relationship with the business administrators, and when I was looking at that, I found it shocking that Laura Marion was the first one on the list. And I confirmed with the business administrator that, in fact, the number that was in the list is incorrect. According to the list, we were number 3. If you eliminate Laura Moreland, we then become number 2. But one of the things, there's multiple things that we should really look at when we're talking about debt. For example, our number at the end of June 30th of 2016 was $12,009,936. But that not only included our revenue and, our principal and interest payments, it also included $323,000 of financing for Chromebooks and also a hub payment of almost $600,000, $550,000. So if you're really doing a debt-to-debt comparison, that's obviously, we're overinflated. Something else that people might find interesting is that number 20 on the list is Upper Moreland. I'm fairly certain that they've been doing construction, but there's another way that school districts can pay for debt. It's called a debt service fund, and a number of school districts transfer money into the debt service fund and then make their bond payments out of that. Since we like to talk about Wissahickon, they are number 21. That is, they have the least debt, no debt, if I understand correctly. That year they did pay, according to this, $82,235 that was charged to Function 5100. Since Mr. Sirota brought up Abington, that year they were number 13 with approximately $8.5 million of debt. Hatboro Horsham, somebody else, or another district that was mentioned, paid slightly over $5 million, again, according to what was reported to the IU and what was charged to the 5100 function, and that was number 11. If you want more information, I can certainly discuss it.
And that's a year and a half old at this point. For
Yes.
instance, Wissahickon now does have debt.
Yes, they do.
And the year before, we were 7th for some reason in debt in the MCIU. I don't know what changed. We were 7th. I don't know if that data was correct, but that's what it was.
I truly don't recall.
Based on what you said the debt actually is, what percent of the budget? Somebody said 15% of our budget is debt service.
When we typically look at the 5100s, I think it's 13 or 14%, but we are still repaying the hub, which is between the payment and the interest is approximately, it's very close to $600,000. And we have Chromebooks, again, $325,000 reported as debt. So if you come to the Finance Committee meeting on February 22nd, I bet we can talk about that for this year as well as next year.
Okay. Just want to clarify the true percentage debt service.
We'll look that up.
Okay. Ms. Francis, you had something.
Just wanted to make a comment on the presentation from the architects and the question about how the buildings could affect student outcomes and student work. I actually worked with the team to generate that question, and perhaps it wasn't worded properly, but the goal was to determine whether or not the architects had a grounding in research-based methodology when they were coming up with their plans. And there is a meta-analysis out of Penn State University from roughly 2015. I don't have it with me tonight, but I can furnish it to anyone that's interested. And it really looked at things, very specific qualities. So it was no way to